everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not writing about being outside, I actually am outside.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach.
And we just got back a few days ago from our first ever vacation in Costa Rica. It was pretty sweet. Lots of dogs and iguanas and a monkey. A raccoon that seemed really friendly, a lot of really good wildlife, and a lot of good relaxation, good walks. I still spoke at the Ontario Cycling Women's Coaching Conference, despite being a time zone away. Managed to Skype with 20 awesome women, and we had a great time.
Yes, you managed to get lots of work done on vacation, so...
Yeah, about that. We did manage to get totally offline for a whopping 24 hours. I think that's a new record for us. So that was pretty exciting. But I mean, as I said at my coaching conference, doing this kind of work means that you don't really get to go offline that often. That's sort of the trade-off. And it's a pretty good one. I was generally pleased with our vacation situation. We tried surfing. Peter is naturally very good at it. I am naturally not.
I don't know about very good, but we were out in the water. Mm-hmm. We did it a couple times. So that's
stood up.
I don't know that we were the ones doing the 360s and so forth.
But... I was going to lie for you and say...
Yeah. No, it's cool. Definitely much nicer and warmer. I'd only tried up in like California and whatnot, and of course being in Canada, all the water seems to always be cold, and I don't like cold water very much, so much easier to grasp the sport when the water is quite nice.
Yeah, when you're not really worried about falling off the board, it's a lot easier to convince yourself to go for it on a wave, for sure.
Yeah, so that was good, and we did lots of walking and lots of sand walking and running, and yeah, and your knee is rehabbed, vacation, and
knock on wood.
Bit of time off, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's knees and runners sort of go together, but yeah, you seem to be doing better. So a little bit of time off, and then a little bit of maybe change of loading on the sand and stuff too might have helped as well. And
I think being warm too, to be honest, because I think the cold just exacerbates. There are a lot of people with like arthritis and stuff that complain the cold weather hurts their joints more. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of. I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's something to that, but there's also a lot of confounding factors of people don't go outside and move as much as they do when it's warm. So
yeah, true.
There is that.
So there's some back and forth on that for sure. So what is your one thing that's particularly interesting to you this week?
I don't know. I was sort of struggling on that.
Nothing is interesting. Life is boring.
It's been good. It's been really good coaching-wise. It's busy, but lots of really good conversations around strength training and, why are we doing this? Some people really hate it, and some people really love it. Some people are just really keen, and then, we have to be careful not to hurt ourselves. But just conversations around that sort of we need to be moving and thinking about movement quality and how that relates back to, maybe cycling. So I had a client in for a sort of assessment. I have people in and sometimes it takes the form of a test, more of a bike fit. Sometimes, we're off the bike doing more strength stuff depending on what the person's dealing with. And so just the conversation of how, where our foot placement and stuff, how that then looks on the bike, right? We have a turned out foot when we're lunging or squatting, and then we've developed this sort of knees caving in towards the top tube, and then our knees are hurting, may or may not be related, but there's sort of these factors that then we can sort of assess on and off the bike. So strength training is just a really cool tool that even goes beyond, am I getting buff or toning my muscles for appearance? There's a lot of movement training, right, that comes out of that. So I think this week my one thing is just, moving and thinking about strength training beyond just, is this making me pedal a bike or run faster, right? Yeah.
I like that. I think now, last time we did this, you talked about grayscaling your phone. That's been your big thing on the phone. So
still doing it.
I know. Yeah. I figured this time I would give a phone one. And that is actually, I took the badges off of my email notification. So that seems really minor, but normally whether I'm running or in line at the grocery store or, doing something else for work or whatever, if I open my phone and I see the badges there with a number, I have to go look and see what's going on, and it'll drive me crazy if I don't. So taking the badges away, now I don't necessarily see, oh, I have new emails. So I found, yesterday, the past few days, now that I took it off, when I'm running, if I do stop to, check something on Strava or Google Maps or whatever, or take a picture, I don't see that number. So I don't get the urge to stop mid-run and check my email, which sounds like a thing a crazy person would do as I said it out loud.
A little bit.
But I did it. Right? Like that was a habit that I had because I saw that number. So taking away that number has actually really changed how often I'm kind of mindlessly reloading my email for no good reason. So I think that's a really good one because you're not taking it off of your phone. I'm not going like that extra step of my email is removed from my phone because I'm, trying really hard to be offline more. It's just made it a little bit less automatic as far as habits go.
Yeah, it's tough with all the notifications and, things distracting us just in general, right? And we talked, I think, a bit last podcast maybe about deep work and just focusing on something, right? And that could be your workout and just taking those hour or 90 minutes to focus on that and not have a phone dinging that you have an Instagram notification, let alone an email or a call, right?
So
it's very easy, even just with any of the technology, right? Like I always harp on clients that, we could just get on the trainer or get on our bike or go for a run and not have any technology, right? There is that ability where we could just use our brains, right? And just, this is a hard run, this is an easy run, this is, use my stopwatch maybe as the technology. There is that sort of simplicity.
Yeah. So now on my phone, the only notifications or badges that I have are just for texts. And even that I've muted pretty much any. That's maybe my other one is muting group chats. I think a lot of us get stuck in them, and they're not necessarily bad. We do want to look at them sometimes, but the phone just constantly buzzing is just so stressful.
You can't have that. That's crazy.
So yeah, I've been muting a lot of conversations. That's our one thing.
What about U.S. Nationals are today? You've done your predictions over on, what is this called? Flow Bikes.
Flow Bikes. Yeah. Although by the time this airs, we're going to be behind. And
that's true.
There's going to be a new national
But they'll
champion.
be in the future and they'll know. So who did you pick? You're going to put that out there for everyone? Or is that a spoiler and they have to go check it out?
It's a bit of a spoiler. You should go check out the thing we did for Flow Bikes. I actually called Jeremy Powers as my dark horse winner for the men's race. And I basically filibustered to avoid having to give my women's prediction because I think between Ellen and Katie Compton, it's going to be a pretty crazy race I'm anticipating. So hopefully by the time, this episode comes out, I haven't been proven too wrong on either front, but...
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of other people that are having good years too.
Totally.
I mean, Katie Keough, obviously.
Definitely.
You never know. I don't know what the weather is.
It's a bit muddy there.
Okay. Well, then it could. Anything can happen.
Yeah, exactly. And the men's race, I'd say there's 5 guys who could take it.
Well, it's been a weird year. I remember in Supercross there for like indoor motorcycle racing, there was a year like that where like all the top people sort of had rough years and crashes and stuff like that. And
many ups and downs.
And then there was a couple people that had like breakthrough years. And then even when the other guys came back, then there was just more people at the top because they had sort of gotten used to racing at the top and wanted to defend that and stuff like that. So could be interesting. So
Definitely.
Hopefully you watch that. If not, hopefully there's a replay someplace. You can check it out. But.
So today's guest is actually not a cyclist. She's a runner. She goes by Jessie Zapo, although her full name is Jessica Zapotechne. She's out of New York, and she's an art therapist in addition to being this really cool urban run organizer. She's organized a bunch of different clubs and groups in New York City, whether it's unisex groups or women's only groups. We talk a ton about kind of just all things with her running history and how she got into running, but then also, how she's managed to organize these really successful running groups. Because that's not an easy thing to put together. It sort of sounds fairly simple, but I mean, Peter and I can attest to this. Like, we've been parts of a couple different running groups and stuff that just kind of fall off the radar after a couple weeks or, a couple runs. So it's a huge testament to her that she has several different groups that she runs on a weekly basis, and different levels, whether it's beginner runners. She's got a few groups that are much more elite level, like, or elite amateur, that actually travel to races. So we talk all about going to races as a group and what that looks like, especially when you're kind of like the manager leader, but you're also a racer. I think that's a really good one for a lot of parents, actually, who maybe go to races with their kids because their kids are racing, but they're racing as well. And, how do you mentally, emotionally, physically handle that? A lot of really interesting stuff there.
Yeah, just even around logistics and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, and we also talk about running as sort of a version of run therapy, basically, because Jessie's main thing is art therapy, and now she's actually starting a business called Restorative Running, where she's doing more therapy through running, which I think is really interesting. There are some psychologists out in California that are doing sessions on the run.
I've heard of walking therapy stuff. They do that at some universities and stuff.
But yeah, apparently running, because it kind of makes you a bit more open and emotional, I guess, for some people anyway, and like willing to share, and it just makes you feel more comfortable, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to have a requisite sort of fitness level, though.
Oh, absolutely. It's not like for beginner runners, but
right.
For some people, that's just the easiest way to kind of get in a zone where they can feel comfortable chatting, which I find really interesting. I mean, I can say, like, I have some of my deepest conversations with friends when we're running or, when we're riding together. So I think there's a lot of merit to that.
Yeah, there's definitely something with exercising. I think we've talked about how I don't know if I would be riding anymore if it weren't for like long days, just sort of talking back and forth with friends and stuff, and how I think it's tough for some people, especially not to harp on technology, but in these days, so to speak, it's less and less common, right? So these things like run groups and actual run groups in person, and then like you say, maybe even some therapy or informal therapy, just sort of talking to friends on some sort of exercise expedition.
All right, but let's let Jessie explain more of that. Let's dive in. First kind of question I had is, like, if someone comes up to you and says, "What do you do?" How do you answer it? I mean, I assume it depends on context, but say someone like in a running outfit came up and said, "What do you do?" How do you describe yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel that I wear a lot of hats. Even in running, I wear a lot of hats. I guess the easiest way is for me to say, well, I'm an artist and I'm a runner. But then to go deeper into that, it's that I'm a licensed creative art therapist. I've been doing that for 13 years in New York City. I'm a running coach, and I've had that identity for the last 4 years or so. And I've just been kind of known in the running community as having built some of the different run crews in New York City in the urban running community over the last decade or so, and been behind a number of different projects. So I would say now that I'm like a creative person who uses art and running to provide wellness tools to other people, and also to really sort of address societal issues that I see or have experienced.
I love that. And so one of the phrases you use is one that I keep seeing kind of over and over whenever I'm looking anything up about you, and that's the idea of this urban running community. So what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I think that phrase kind of was birthed about 15 years ago when this group emerged that's called the New York City Bridge Runners. And they were really an alternative take on what traditional run groups were. I happened to stumble onto them in their inception because it was started by a nightlife guy, and I was a bartender, and I worked in the restaurant industry, and so we came across each other in a not athletic context whatsoever. And he was starting this, I don't even know, maybe he said run club, or like, I'm doing this running thing. But he was someone who you would look at and think he was like the furthest from athletic, just based off his appearance. And it was interesting to me. And essentially what he was doing was like getting people that worked in the creative industries or like nightlife to get together and run across the bridges in Lower Manhattan. And I think early on he got Nike involved from the inception, and they were interested in this idea that like people who were non-runners might want to run. And honestly, it just was so different than what was happening with like traditional track clubs or sort of amateur adult groups of runners. And it really brought together such a wide range of people who were every shape and size, and really diverse ethnically and socioeconomically. And it kind of just became this like alternative movement of people who were, I guess, would probably never call themselves a runner. And the thread, and the reason why it was called urban running, or people definitely referred to it as urban running, was that we also weren't running in traditional spaces where runners would be. So we would start on the street somewhere. I remember the first time I showed up, it was like a tiny park in Chinatown. There's no bag check. There's no water. There's nothing sort of like denoting this run group except for like a couple of guys like standing there. And we ran across one bridge into Brooklyn, and then kind of made our way to the other bridge and came back. And it was always about like running in the street, or running through neighborhoods where you wouldn't want to walk through, especially like maybe by yourself. And it became this real exploration of New York City. And I think in particular that group, it was like, you know, people who'd never ran before, or maybe they hadn't done sports in many years, getting together, running through the streets. Sometimes the groups would be really big. Like it built a following after a while. And so, you know, we could flex up to like 200 people running through the streets, and that would always surprise passerby. And we could also be a group of like 4 or 5 people just like running through a sketchy neighborhood. And it just was really different than what was happening at the time. And I think we were doing it. And then like years later, we discovered like, oh, there's also groups kind of popping up in these other cities like London and Paris and Copenhagen. And that they're kind of have the same sort of vibe. They're non-traditional people running, and they're running using the urban environment as their track or their gym. And yet we all had sort of a different take on it, because each city is different, and, you know, culturally, people were different. But
yeah,
it was interesting. I mean, it's more ubiquitous now. Like you see people running around every neighborhood, everywhere in New York City now, which is really cool. And you see every type of person running. But back then, you I would see people maybe in Prospect Park, Central Park for sure, but like you just weren't seeing people like running through the streets.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm interested in the differences between the cities, especially since you just came back from London. So if you had to describe like New York urban running versus London urban running, how would you describe both of them?
Oh yeah, so
I'm putting you on the spot here.
No, it's perfect timing actually, because when I was out there, I got to connect with Charlie Dark, who is the founder of Rundum Crew, who's a good friend of mine. And then our other friend, Jay Smith from Paris Run Club, was there also. And actually Nils from the Speed Project was there. So it was like this kind of, I wasn't expecting it to be this meeting of like all these sort of big personalities in running right now. So it was cool. We had some opportunities to run together in London, and I think I did maybe like in the 5 days I was there, I probably did like 6 runs. Like a couple of days we like ran twice, and I was remarking about how like, sometimes people come to New York and they're like, oh my God, it's so crazy here. And I was thinking, wow, in London it's so crazy here.
Yeah.
Because you can't really run in the street. And the streets are really narrow. The sidewalks are super narrow. There's cobblestones everywhere. We ran in the morning and at night, and morning actually was better, super early, because I think like where we were at in Shoreditch, like pub life is so prevalent that like folks are out really late at night, like kind of partying, but then early in the morning, nobody's out.
Yeah.
So like the early run was really dope, but like the night runs were so precarious because you're just dodging bikes and people. And if you like stepped into the street, like might get hit by a bus. We ran along the canals for a little bit, and that was like super cool because it was really dark. And at the same time, like one of the girls running with us like stepped funny and like almost fell into the canal because you're like right there.
Yep.
And I was just thinking, I was like, whoa, this is so different. And even, like obviously London and New York are different. I mean, there's similarities, but I was thinking about how you have to just adapt to wherever you're at. And the London crew, like Rundum Crew, had a really nice way of getting like 100 people to run together. And that was, they broke them into smaller groups, and then the smaller groups each had different routes. And they used different routes to get to the same meeting point. And they met like halfway through the run at one point, like everyone was coming from a different direction. And then they met at that point, and then they left and went back. And then people were just running in all directions, but they knew where they were going based off of the group leaders, and like the specific routes. And I was like, wow, this is like such a cool take on running, and super different than like what we do here in New York.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, I love that so much of it is about adapting to your environment.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the canals. We were in London right around this time last year, and we almost had the exact same, like almost falling in. And I'm always amazed that they don't have, like, in New York, there'd be railings everywhere, right? Like, you'd have to work to fall in. But there,
right.
It's just like, nope, you just step wrong and you're sliding down.
Yep.
Yeah, we also almost got smoked by several buses just based on the driving on the other side of the road thing. And it's such a cliche,
exactly.
But it's such a hard thing to get used to.
It's so hard to get used to. I mean, there's a reason why they put look left, look right on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, so when you first kind of got involved with the Bridge Runners back in 2005, I mean, who were you as a runner at that point?
I would say that I was a former athlete who would jog around to kind of stay healthy. And I say that because growing up, I was super into sports. I had 5 brothers. My dad was very sporty. Like, we spent actually most of our summers outdoors, like doing everything. And I had a big family, so we could have our own kickball game with just the kids, or we would play softball, or we would run around. We did everything, and when I was towards the end of my senior year of high school, was like, had an opportunity to get a college scholarship to play volleyball at some different like Division II schools. And I just ended up like going in a really different direction and saying, like, you know what, I want to go to art school. And I felt like if I went to art school, I had to kind of let go of being an athlete. And you actually kind of do have to do that, because a lot of art schools like don't have sports teams or
Right.
athletics. And if they do, they certainly don't really cater like studio time to being able to practice sports. So I went to art school, and I just kind of like always kept running as something that I did for myself. I think it would always be a solo pursuit for me, because like I ran track and field, and that was definitely like a group running activity, but I wasn't like a cross country runner. I wasn't like in a run club after that. And so like if I did go out, it would be just like jog something by myself.
Right.
And then that was it. So when I heard about Bridge Runners, it was actually through Mike Sace, who was the leader. And he asked me like a couple times, like, hey, like, should come out to this group. And I guess maybe he looked at me and thought, like, she looks a little bit sporty or something. or he was just recruiting like whoever. But at that point in time, I actually had been living near Prospect Park, and I would go to the park as like my quiet time for myself, and I would run the loop, which just happened to be like a 5K. So I have to say, like, no, I didn't start from zero when I went to Bridge Runners. I had like enough of a fitness level that I could run one lap of Prospect Park. But I definitely did not consider myself a runner, and I had never really had the courage to like join up with other groups of runners. Like, it just wasn't on my like radar.
Yeah.
So the very first time I went out with Bridge Runners, the run was like over 4 miles, and I'd never ran that far before. And I honestly like could not have ever conceptualized myself running more than 3 miles. I don't even know if I knew I was running 3 miles, like when I would go to Prospect Park. You know, like that was back, like nobody was tracking runs back then. I don't think there were even like trackers. So like it didn't even, you know, like it didn't occur to me. Like I definitely wasn't like timing it, or like, I don't even know if I knew it was 5K. So I remember that first run and like it just being so hard. And when I finished it, I was like, wow, I just did something. Something, you know, like it was crazy. I don't know. It was like, it really opened up, a door opened.
Yeah. And I mean, that team versus solo element of it too. Did you find that you liked running with other people? Like,
so yes. And I mean, I think it got obviously sort of built off of that. But the first time I showed up, it was 3 guys and me. And, you know, I was like, oh shit, like what am I doing? I had no idea. Like, I didn't know like who was going to be there, or if it's going to be a big group or whatever. but it was just these three dudes, and I was like, okay, well, I'm here now. Like, I can't, like, slip away. They've already seen me.
Yep.
So I have to do it. And, you know, there's a competitive side in me for sure, which was like, I have to keep up with them. Mm-hmm. And so I remember just like, also, you don't know, like, I didn't know anything about pacing or like what a pace was. I just was like, ran as fast as I could to try to like keep up with them. And I think I enjoyed feeling like I just like accomplished something, but it kind of required the chase. And two, actually, like, they were just so nice to me. Like, they were really encouraging. Like, even though it seemed intimidating at the beginning, like showing up, they were so happy that I came that they were like, I remember Stace like waiting at the top of the bridge, just being like, come on, like, you can do it, and like waiting for me. And you know, it just, from the beginning, like, it felt like they were so stoked that I was there. And then I think there was like a period of me sort of unlocking, like, okay, what am I capable of through this group? But then that transitioned into me being like, hey, other people can be new also. And like, I was in the back in the beginning because I was fast. I mean, not fast. I was slow. I was slower. Slower than everyone else. So I started in the back, and then you like get faster, and then there's other people in the back, and I was always kind of interested in like those people. Like, could I help encourage them? And so I just sort of naturally grew into what later I would be called as Bridge Mom. And it's funny too, because like growing up, I was the oldest of 8 kids, so I definitely took on mom roles from a teenage point in my life. And it's funny now, because I'm like almost 40, like thinking about people calling me Bridge Mom back when I was like 26.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wasn't like even that old, but I think it was this sort of like persona where I would welcome new people, and I would try to like take people under my wing and like make sure they're okay, and looking out for anyone who is struggling. And then later doing lots of the like kind of administrative stuff. Like, when we first got Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, like I was like running all of those platforms for us. So I definitely had this sort of motherly role in the Bridge Runners.
Yeah, and then
from early on.
Yeah, so and then you shifted eventually, and you started the Girls Run NYC program. So I mean, clearly you got bored of running with. I mean, I know Bridge Runners grew, but from that 3 dudes, you then started a thing that was for women. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so a couple things happened in between.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm trying to read through. I was like, oh my God, she started so many different cool things and been part of so many cool groups. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, well, you know, for me, I think, one, if you think about it, it was a lot of time. Since 2005, like a lot of years have gone by. So even though it seems like a lot of projects, it was happening where, like, I was with Bridge Runners for 7 years. And which actually, when I think about it, I'm like, damn, 7 years, like, super consistent. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And I think I really, you know, kind of grew and evolved in that group. And one of the things that I really became passionate about was like, hey, you know, this group gets people to run who would never have ever ran before. But then there's like the next evolution, which is that they're like, okay, now I'm getting kind of fit. Maybe I'm faster. What else can I do? And people were getting excited about like joining races or like setting goals for themselves. Like, running a half marathon. But they were doing that just kind of like piecing it together, like running, you know, as far as they could on a Wednesday night, which was our runs, and then like joining a half marathon.
Right.
So some people, you know, like people were running like once a week and then doing a half. And so I was like, hey, you know what? There's ways to train, and I'm interested in like doing that. And, you know, I ran a bunch of half marathons off of not a lot of training, and I kind of thought maybe there could be something more. And so we just started this kind of training program within Bridge Runners, and specifically at that time, there was the Nike Women's Race Series, and there was a race that happened that was a full and a half marathon in San Francisco. And I heard about it, and I was like, I want to do that. And so I was like, all right, cool. Like, let's see if we can get some slots to do it. And because we were associated to the brand, they were like, sure. So the first year, I think they gave us like three or four slots. So like 4 of us trained and like went out and did it. And it was fun. And then I was like, okay, like, let's do that again and see if we can get more people to do it. And so the second year, we got, I think, 7 or 8 slots. And so we just asked a bunch of the women in the group who would like to train for a marathon and let's go to San Francisco. And so I think we had maybe 2 people who had done a marathon before, but like the majority had never done one. And so it was like really exciting to create a training program for those women and to train up to the race and then go out and do it. And it also, I think that was like really the impetus for me to start Black Roses, was this idea that like, hey, we can actually watch people get better and we can like help people get better. But it requires commitment.
Yeah.
And it requires consistency. And like with the Bridge Runner model, which was their phrase is like, just show up, which is amazing because yes, it got so many people to just show up and not worry about showing up. And then for me, the second step was like, okay, and now like, let's get commitment and consistency. And so, I decided to leave Bridge Runners and start Black Roses. And I was also working with Knox Robinson at the time because he had joined the Bridge Runners that year. And we kind of formulated what we thought it would be, which was to create this training season that essentially people would commit to a season, and that would be 6 months. And we would give them like a weekly training plan leading up to goal races, and that it would be a small group of people. So we didn't want it to be like hundreds of people. We kept it at 25. And that was like the beginning of Black Roses. And to be fair, I wanted it to be a women's group. And it didn't turn out that way. But that was my thought because I was really into this training that we had done for San Francisco.
Yeah.
But then Knox was like, hey, I want to like add some guys in, so we have some guys to train with. And so basically we said, all right, let's make it 15. Sorry, I'm right by like a high school, just now getting out of school.
Oh dear.
I'm walking away. So yeah, we said 15 women and 10 men, and I was like really adamant that the ratio be more women to men because I wanted it to feel like a sort of like equal training space. And I also, you know, side note was that Bridge Runners and a lot of other kind of these urban run groups have mostly male leadership. And can also tend to feel like cool guy groups,
Sure.
which like is cool, and I don't have a problem with cool guy groups because I enjoyed being there, but it also can sometimes be a barrier to women joining.
For sure.
And it can become really competitive too, in a way that might not feel welcoming to women. So with Black Roses, it was like kind of striking that balance. And then, yeah, I did 2 years of Black Roses, so that was like 4 seasons of training. And, you know, with that evolution, I ultimately was like, you know what, I want a women's group. Like the co-ed space was awesome, and I, you know, loved being in that space, but I always had like this nagging desire to create just a women's space.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Girls Run.
Yeah. So when did that started in 2015?
It did, yes.
Okay, so what did starting that look like? Did you actually shut down Black Roses and then start it? Were you trying to balance the two at the same time, or what did it look like?
No, so essentially what happened, and I'll also say that in between there was another group that I started called the Breakfast Club.
Which I also loved. I looked up that one, and fantastic.
Yes, Breakfast Club is by far like one of the most interesting sort of like creative spaces that I've had to be in, which we're always talking about like resurrecting it, but it's kind of been like, it's been a little bit like loose. But anyways, that's another story. So Girls Run, basically what happened was that there was a really big shift in the urban running community that summer that I left Black Roses. And part of the shift was that a lot of groups had actually sprung up. Initially, there was only bridge runners, and when we decided to like break off and start Black Roses, people were so surprised and kind of like scandalized. They were just like, "What? Like, how can there be another like urban running group?" And you know, it was controversial. And then within probably a short amount of time, people just started creating their own groups. Mm-hmm. And, you know, people splintered off, and like all these groups started popping up. Like We Run Uptown. There's now like tons of groups. There's Resident Runners has been around for a while. There's, you know, now like every borough has multiple run crews. But at the time it was weird, and people were kind of like, why would you do that? And so a lot of these different kind of small groups popped up around different figures and neighborhoods, and many of them were sponsored or associated to this one brand, which was sort of like the overarching umbrella that kept everyone together. Mm-hmm. And then I think there was sort of a fracture in the running community, and people started kind of breaking away from each other. A lot of times this happens when different brands like kind of pop up and get involved. But I just really felt like I was not connecting with Black Roses anymore. It had changed from what I initially wanted it to be, which was a sort of like safe space for training and training folks who were non-traditional people, and giving them like this sort of running culture experience. Like we did a lot of stuff around traveling, and I just got disillusioned with it, and so I decided to step away and just handed over leadership to Knox, and I didn't do anything for probably like close to 4 or 5 months. And I ran by myself, but I was struggling. I actually hadn't, what was interesting is that I hadn't ran alone in a really long time. And I realized I had been like leading all of these groups and bringing people together through running, and no longer had sort of my own running practice.
Right.
And so I just started running by myself. And there were other things going on in my life at the same time, career-wise, relationship-wise. And it was one of those moments where I just was like feeling kind of lost, feeling a bit like, what is the next step for me? And I did like a cross-country road trip. I left a job I'd been at for 10 years. I was like all over the place and just needed to step away from leading something. And so I took some time for myself. And in that time, I had people who said to me, they were like, you know, Jessie, like, why do you feel like you have to always like partner with someone else? Why don't you ever like consider just doing something, you know, for you? And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I think that the right thing for me to do is stick with what feels like is really important to me, which really was getting women to run and sort of sharing running with them. And so I just started doing a series called Girls Run With Me, and I decided I wanted to do it as a pop-up. And I was really hesitant to give it a name because I knew, especially with like other projects, like as soon as I name something, it like becomes a thing.
Right.
And I was like, I don't want to create another run crew. I don't want to, you know, be, you know, taking people away from things they're already doing. But I do want to create a space where women can come together. And so this pop-up runs, I started it actually like late December. So it was like terrible weather, super snowy. And I just was like, whatever, I'm just going to like make a flyer as if it's sort of like party promoter style. I'll make a flyer. I'll put it on Facebook. Oh, no, sorry. That's a lie. Not Facebook. Instagram. I put it on Instagram. Yeah. And I was just like, come run with me if you are a woman or a girl. And like the first run, I think like 14 or 18 people showed up. And I was like, oh, okay. Like people do want to run with me, and also women want to be in a women's space. And so I just kept doing it, but on a pop-up basis. And I did some stuff where I like partnered with this guy who was a restaurateur, and we did like a run where he made food that he thought that was plant-based, that he thought would be good for runners. And we just tried to, I was just creative about it and tried to like, just no rules, make it fun, no brand affiliation. I was like, this is going to be grassroots. It's just going to be what I want to do. And I'm just going to invite like every single woman that I know. And within like, I would say December, January, February, like within like 2.5 months, you know, it had already made like a big impact. And we had this opportunity to sign up for a race in Toronto that was a women's race. And we had I think like 20 women that wanted to do it. So we put 20 women on this training plan, and people were like, well, you need to have a name. It's a group. So that's when I called it Girls Run NYC. And it's just since then evolved into this women's community. And I like to call it a women's collective because it's not a run crew. It's an open space, even though there are some people that are diehard Girls Run women. It's really meant to provide hopefully the least amount of barriers to running. And I want it to be a space that's approachable. And so I guess for me in running, it's always been about trying to evolve like the idea of what's happening in running, and then I think to look for what's missing. And so every time I like worked on a project, it was always about like trying to create something where something was missing. So yeah, that was what Girls Run was. With that sort of next evolution. Thanks.
And then, okay, so for yourself too, I mean, so Bridge Runners was originally a Nike supported thing, so was Black Roses, and now you're actually with Adidas Runners and Adidas Women. How did that happen, or when did that happen?
Yeah, so it happened when I broke free from my Nike affiliated groups, and just said, you know what, I'm just going to do me. I'm going to do this grassroots thing. And I think it also happened to be a moment where women's fitness was like really at the forefront of what people wanted in marketing. And so I just happened to be like also running probably one of the only women's only workouts. And it's funny because like even in the last like 4 years, like the landscape for women has changed so much. We have like things like the wing now that didn't exist then, and there's so much more acceptance of women's circles and like women's only spaces. It's very much like, important today, but at the time not so much, which is kind of funny actually. And so people took notice that I had a women's only space, and that there were quite a number of women like turning up to this space, and that the space itself, even though it is designed around running, it is like a women's community. And so I think Adidas Women took notice of that because they were beginning to build this group of what they call creators, which are women in the sort of fitness sphere. And they reached out to me, and I started working with Adidas Women. And it really was interesting because it was like me meeting women from many different fitness backgrounds, some of them being like former competitive soccer players, or people who were into boxing, or cycling instructors, or yogis. And even though running is kind of my sport of choice, I sort of fit into this like versatile athlete range. And so it felt like a really nice community to be in at the same time. And so, and different than what I had been doing before with Nike. So I was very heavily in this women's space, from Adidas Women, from Girls Run, for a couple of years. And it was interesting to really just be like in women's fitness. Yeah. And after doing that for a couple of years, they they decided they were going to launch Adidas Runners in New York City, and they asked me if I wanted to be a part of it. And it was interesting because I was like, oh my God, I haven't like coached people in the co-ed community. I haven't even been running with guys in a while. You know, it was like a really interesting like idea to me to like enter back into that space. But it seems like people like to make noise on purpose when they see you on the phone. Like, this guy is, like, slowly rolling by with loud music on. Or, like, the teenagers were, like, having a loud conversation standing in front of me. Yeah. It's, like, really interesting. So, yeah, I joined Adidas Runners, and I entered in as a coach, actually the coach for the project. And I've been working with them now for a year, and it's been a really cool experience. Also being with this like global brand, because they've got this running community in 62 cities around the world. But we're just now like creating the North America landscape of what that looks like. So it's interesting for me to be in that position, having had over a decade of running, getting close to 14 years of running in New York, and then sort of reimagining how that can look again.
Yeah.
And we actually had a conference when I was in London last week. The theme around this like 2-day workshop was like, what is the future of running? Or what do you think the future of running is? And so that was super interesting to me, because having seen a lot of the past and present, or been involved in creating a lot of the past and present, it's always a challenge to think like how you can keep innovating or like keep being relevant in a sport that's really old and like actually just very natural. Like, I think it's so natural for people to run. Something you do when you're a baby. Like, as soon as you can stand upright, you're like, babies want to run.
Yeah.
So it's interesting thinking about like how that can evolve.
So I think what's interesting too, though, is, I mean, you also, so you're talking about all of these races and stuff, but we haven't really talked about the fact that you also race in these, right? Like, you're not just bringing women to these marathons and like saying like, okay, I'll see you guys at the finish line. Like, you're competing too. How do you balance being sort of this like figurehead, but then also doing your training and, you know, actually doing this whole distance racing thing?
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? That's it. Thank you for asking that. Because it's really hard.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because like, you know, one of the things we were talking about and that I think is interesting is that I think coaching has changed. And what's different about coaching now to me is that coaches are like also fully in it. Like, if I look around like the community of run coaches in New York City, like, for the most part, a lot of them are still competing. A lot of them are still fit. It's not like when I was in high school, the fat guy smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, and so what's interesting is like thinking about how this new generation of coaches is like very fully committed to like being active also. That to me is super inspiring. And it also like is a big responsibility in even another way, which is that like the way that I like to coach is to also be out there running alongside of you. And so that's hard.
Yeah.
It partially for me, and I talk about this too with people, it's like every race or marathon for me is not the finish line. because I have to keep being able to run. Like, I don't want to be like riding a bike alongside of my runners, like when they're doing their workout. And I also don't want to be like at the start and the end, like sort of being like, let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
Like I want to be in there with them. And so like when I go out for a marathon, I'm thinking, okay, I want to feel good. I want to feel strong. I want to have a nice race, but I also cannot be injured. I can't like push it that hard because I need to be able to run like the week after, and I need it's not the finish line for me. There's a lot more. And so for me, I like to say I'm super conservative, which is that I pretty much know what my body's capable of, at this point. And so for me, I try to train smart. I try to do a lot of stuff to make sure I'm like getting my recovery in and I'm not overdoing it. And also that like, yeah, I still do want to be out racing. Like I don't want to be on the sidelines. And so it's hard because sometimes I'll be like, damn, I just did my long run like super slow because I'm running with other people and it's important to me for those people. But now, like, I'm not going to be able to race at what I would like to run because all of my training was not at the pace that I want to be at. So it's like, it's that give and take where you're like, well, ultimately, most of these races are not for me. It's for the team or it's for the community.
Right.
And so it's a give and take. But then on the flip side, what I've come to the conclusion is that also I need to have races that are just for me. And I need to sort of strategically place those in my life where I can do that on my own and still have that relationship, which is just for me. And I think that's a goal, is to do that more.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's funny that you even say, that you have to race conservatively now, because I think to race conservatively actually still, like, I'd say is almost requires you to be in better shape than to race hard in a lot of ways. Because to be able to race a marathon conservatively is, still racing a marathon and also racing it with the intention of smiling the entire way through and being emotionally like capable at the end of like, being positive. I'm not someone you can talk to at the end of something like that.
Right.
It's hard. So yeah,
it's hard.
Even the emotional part. Oh my God.
It's funny because it's hard no matter how you slice it. Yeah. Right. It was really interesting in Berlin this year because we took like a lot of folks out from New York to race, and people have been training really hard, and some people had really great days, some people did not. I'd say a lot of people were kind of surprised that they didn't like PR in the way that maybe they thought they would or should. And so there was like this really interesting conversation around Berlin where people are just like, how was it? Like, was it awesome? Did you like kill it? Like, or even like before, people were like, you're going to like have the fastest race of your life or whatever. And at the end, I was like, you know what? Like, just because it's a flat course or like world records are here doesn't make it not a marathon.
Yeah.
Like it's still really hard. And like, like just because it's quote unquote fast course doesn't mean that like you're going to take 30 minutes off your previous time. It's just really like interesting, like sort of having conversations with people around what can happen on marathon day. And the answer is it's as different as every person is different. Like anything can happen. And so, Yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so the last thing I kind of wanted to bring up is I know you just did a talk, I think of it, was it last night or the night before? Last night, about finding balance between, working hard, but also the whole idea of self-care, which I know is such a buzzword, but nonetheless, it's an important
Yeah.
one. So let's talk about it. What were some of your top tips that you were giving the audience when you had this talk last night?
Yeah, so it was really something I'm pretty passionate about because I am a mental health professional. Although I like to think of myself as a wellness professional. Because I think there's a big difference between like the community of mental health, which in America especially is very much focused on people being sick and there's something wrong with them. And the difference between like wellness, which is actually more of a strengths-based approach, which is that people are adaptive and there are ways to adapt to things which can be healthy or unhealthy. And so giving people the tools and skills to be their best self is more of how I see myself as a wellness person. So I was super inspired to like talk about one, being an entrepreneur, which is hard.
Yeah.
And it's challenging and it's scary. And then how do you do that and also still take care of yourself at the same time? And so I think we talked a lot about just the challenges of being an entrepreneur. Especially our panel was all women, so I think we're also specifically coming from that lens of like also being an entrepreneur as a woman, which means that you're stepping outside of traditional like gender roles, and you're taking leaps to sort of trust in yourself to create income when it's not the comfort of maybe a 9 to 5. So some of the stuff I talked about was the importance of having a community around you. I think I feel that I've worked really hard in my life, but it's not accurate to say, I couldn't say that I was self-made, because it is really like relationships that kind of get you to different places in life, and no one can get somewhere by themselves. So really acknowledging like the important relationships in my life and nurturing them has been super important for how I've even been able to get where I am today. Being mindful to, I think, curate your inner circle of people and kind of have people around you who maybe are doing the same thing or have the same interests, or also like truly, passionate about what they do and also supportive about what you do, because it can feel kind of lonely and isolating when you're like starting a business or like starting something on your own. And I think we talked a lot about how to recognize if you're maybe doing too much, which I think is like, especially if you work for yourself or you're creating something, like it's hard to say like, okay, these are the hours that I'm working on this project, and then it ends at a certain time. Like I feel like I'm working 7 days a week and I'm always on.
Yeah.
And so like, how do you recognize when to turn off or like when to shut off or when you're doing too much? So we kind of talked about having those warning signs, like getting sick. Like a lot of times our bodies are a really great indicator that we've done too much when you start to get sick. Or even just have, like, again, sort of having that circle of people around you who are honest with you, who can say, like, hey, are you taking care of yourself? Like, have you, done something for yourself today? I definitely have, like some women in my inner circle that are like, hey, you're doing too much. Or like, are you okay? Are you sleeping? And I think that those are, for me, like keys to like really being able to be successful, is like cultivating those people that are in your life that you trust. And then, you know, a lot of it too is about, for me, about like digital detoxing. And
yes,
it's hard because like I do like technology and I like using it. And I'm probably can owe a lot of my project success to being like early adopters of technology and being able to like use social media fairly well. But there's, you know, there should be limits, and no one's giving those limits. Like, you have to figure what they are. So really like developing some routines around when the phone goes off, when it goes away, when you're not looking at it. And even like little things like, it can't be the first thing I look at in the morning. Like, there's got to be time that goes by. I need to drink water first. I need to like use the bathroom first. Like, there need to be other things. So it's not just like wake up and go to sleep, what's happening on Instagram. And yeah, I think we kind of talked also about something that I do believe in, and I've like said this before in regards to running, and I think it applies to also like careers and life, is that don't wait until you're ready, because you'll never be ready. You'll never know if you're ready. And so just whatever it is that you're really like wondering to do, like, you should just start and not worry so much that you're not going to be good at it, or that like it's not the right time, or that you're not perfect. Because one thing I have learned from even working with major brands, or like having mentors in my life who seem really successful or who are really successful, is that nobody ever really has their shit together.
Yep.
And it's really freeing when you realize that, because then you can just do stuff and you will get better at it. But if you don't just start, like, it's not going to happen.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, there was so many good pieces of advice. See, people seem to think self-care is just this like mud mask idea. So really excited to talk about actual good, useful things.
I know. And you're right. It's a buzzword, but I'm also just super happy that it's trendy.
Yeah,
and it's like,
know.
You know what I mean? It's like some of the stuff that's trendy right now, sometimes you're just like, oh my God, I've been doing this for 20 years and now it's trendy.
Yeah.
But like at the same time, like, thank God it's trendy. Like, we need people to be taking care of themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting. I think actually in a weird way, stuff like this tends to be more acceptable in, I'd say, in urban areas in the city more. And like, I don't know, I live at the moment more out in the country, and it feels like if you say self-care, people out here kind of like scoff at it because it feels like more of like a city thing. But I'm hoping that it's starting to get out here and into consciousness.
Yeah. I you know, before this call, I was on another call about a panel that I'll be doing at Wanderlust next week. And one of the women brings yoga to like kids in like a rural neighborhood in Texas. And she was talking about how even like they don't use the term yoga because it's not like sort of culturally like relevant or appropriate for the kids that they want to reach. And so they call it like mindful movement or something different. But even sort of thinking about how like wellness or self-care very much has this sort of luxury aspect to it now, and like
exactly.
like yeah, like being healthy is the new rich, and it's just, you know, it's unfortunate if that is limiting to people, and I hope we like think of other ways to like talk about it and make it something that's approachable, because my family lives in the Midwest, and actually some of them live in Texas, and I think part of the reason why I'm so into being healthy is like just having watched my family be really unhealthy, and like seeing my dad struggling with congestive heart failure and having diabetes, and all of those things being lifestyle related. And it hurts me, and I also know like no amount of me nagging him to stop smoking will ever get him to stop smoking. But like maybe if my siblings see me being really healthy, it would influence them to think that they could also be healthy. And so I think that's a big motivator for me too, is like I want to be just a regular person who's healthy, that other people are like, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And it's not like unattainable.
I love that. Awesome. All right, where can everyone find you on the interwebs?
So probably the most up-to-date place would be on my Instagram, which is Jessie Zapo. I also tweet from the same handle, Jessie Zapo. And I have a website, jessiezapo.com.
So easy.
It's so easy. I try to streamline it. But also a project that I'm starting now is called Restorative Running, and I'm starting a practice that involves movement and art therapy together.
Oh,
so
cool.
Yeah, so that's getting off the ground now, so that'll be something to kind of watch for. But
awesome.
Yeah, I'm out here.
Very cool, and that'll all be in the show notes. Awesome. This was so much fun chatting with you. I'm so glad we got to talk. Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.